An exciting Monday afternoon. We are here once more to go through what is really going on in this great continent of ours, Africa, on the program Africa Discourse, and I'm your host, Wilson Omasha. Today we're taking a look at the AU. When I'm talking about AU, it just means the African Union, their place, their roles in social, economic, and political stability. But like saying that the AU is not living up to expectations, that there are so many things that they're not paying attention to. The big question now is, what are those factors limiting their functionality? What are those things fighting against them? Or is it a case of nonchalance? Or maybe, just maybe, we don't have the right persons in the right position in the AU to make it take. So these are questions bedeviling the mind of so many concerned citizens in Africa as a continent. With me here in the studio to throw more light on this discourse, I have a legal practitioner. When we talk about local and international politics, he's well grounded. He's a human rights activist. You just name it, the list just goes on and on. A businessman. I have to stop here. Please join me. Welcome, Barrister Louis Ojomo. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate your comment.
No problem. Thank you.
Right, now, here we are today. African Union, despite the myriads of events, myriads of activities, as many of them affecting Africa as a continent, the Union seems to be dormant. According to so many claims, saying that we don't know if this Union is truly living up to its name. What's your take generally? You can even start off by giving us a kind of foundation for the African Union.
Right. Just to take your last sentence, that a lot of people are wondering why the African Union appears to be sleeping or ineffective. That will help me in answering and giving you a foundation. We have to understand why the African Union was born. Africa as a continent has been through a lot of pain and difficulties. Of course, Africa suffered 4 centuries of slavery. And after slavery was abolished, we also went through a period of colonization. So from human slavery to economic slavery via colonization. And then in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, with a multitude of African countries becoming independent. Of course, independence in a lot of these countries was short-lived, so we had the military era. So you are seeing a catalog of events that has made it difficult for Africa to progress. First of all, we had slavery. After slavery, we had colonization. None of these were meant to foster Africa. Then after colonization, we have independence, then we have military rule and dictators littering the land space of Africa. And after the dictators have pillaged and done their bit, we come into democratic government. Democratic government itself, unfortunately, which is supposed to be, government of the people, for the people, by the people, became the government for the thieves, by the thieves, and for the thieves.
Now, come on, watch your definitions, come on.
I'm talking about Africa. This is something that has happened across Africa.
Okay.
And of course, we can see that a lot of presidents, since the 60s, we're not talking about present-day Africa. When a tree is big, you don't just see it as a big tree. It started from a seed. So the problems of Africa today that the AU is trying to deal with, we must look back to the history. You can't be suffering malaria today and all you are thinking about is taking malaria therapy. You have to think of the mosquito. How is the mosquito formed? How does it come about? What environment prospers the mosquito? If you're only concentrating on Coartem and the other drugs and never focus on the mosquito itself, then you're only looking at the symptomatic issues and not looking at the causal factors. So if we are going to consider the AU, first of all, we must look at where Africa is coming from. Africa has come from 400 years of slavery. It has been through colonization. You know, the scramble for Africa, where every single country in Africa was owned practically by a foreign country. Our ideas, our ideals, our values, our culture, tradition, political system, system of inheritance, marriage, system of agriculture, all these things were put to the side. And due to colonization, foreign influences were brought into Africa. I remember as a child, we had an ABC book, we called it that time, and you will see A for apple. At that time as a child, I didn't know what an apple was, but in the school we were told A for apple. So you see the kind of erosion of our own values. So when you are talking about the AU and what the problems are that we are having, you must look at history. Where is Africa coming from? What has happened to his value system? What happened to his regional, traditional, cultural set of the kingdoms? What happened to all of those things? So the AU has come about because there has been a need to have a structured method for which countries within Africa will be protected by a single body. And of course, we had something like this before with the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, which was set up in 1963 as a result of many countries becoming independent. It was felt that there had to be an organization like the European Economic Community, for example, and that would safeguard Africa's interest, that would prosper Africa's interest, but unfortunately the OAU, due to a lot of administrative issues, inability to gather themselves, and also due to lack of finance and interference, again from the foreign bodies who would not let go, because even though we became independent, the tentacles of colonialism were deep in our skin, and they were still drawing blood. So the OAU was really an impotent organization. And then in 2002, the AU that we presently have was given birth to. And as a result of the poor or inability of the OAU to actually get itself together. So in answer to your question, I've had to give you a history as to where Africa is coming from, where it was in the intermediate sector, and where it is now presently. And after 16 or so years of being in existence, the African Unity Organization, I would say unfortunately, has still been unable largely to break from the shackles that Africa has been bedeviled with over the centuries. But again, that is a reason, it's not an excuse. But I always say that, if we are to hold on to the reasons why we are not making progress and justify our backwardness, then we are never going to move forward. So for me, I think it's very important that the African Union begins to have a new focus, create a new template for themselves, because unfortunately, like most countries in Africa, we are still being remotely guided, remotely teleguided by foreign powers. It is not unusual to see that most of our military across Africa, they're either British trained, French trained, American trained. You see? So a lot of our leaders, those who have led this country in the military era, for example, have had influences from these foreign countries. And unfortunately, a lot of them have been stooges and collaborators with foreign countries. And very often when you have a strong African leader who is trying to project either his country or Africa as a whole, there's usually a coup. And the African Union needs to be able to put an end to these type of occurrences. We have seen many instances in the past where there are violent takeovers by rebels who sometimes you wonder, how did they get the money to buy these arms and ammunition with which they are fighting the government? So organizations like the AU should be in place to make sure that there is stability in Africa.
All right. stability in Africa. But there was a change because you gave a very strong foundation for this discourse. What about the change in name? Affairs was inaugurated in May 25, 1963. As you rightly said, it was disbanded also in 2002 in the month of July by Thabo Mbeki by changing of the name from Organization of African Unity to African Union. Now the change of name, from your own assessment, is there any difference?
I don't think so. You know, all organizations, corporate, what have you, go through a period of rebranding, you know, image laundering. And I think really what has happened largely has been cosmetic. It has been cosmetic, not effective. Changing the name, what is in a name? Whether you choose to call me a Nigerian or call me an Edo man, or I think what is important is what I do, how I do it, when I do it. You know, we should be result oriented. So calling it OAU, AU, whatever you want to call it, what we are interested in is the result. You see, rebranding is you know, it's good, it's nice, but when you rebrand, you must also have a resultant effect. You don't just change your clothes because you need to have a change of clothes. You must also be able to achieve something from those change of clothes. So in rebranding the organization that looks after Africa, I wish that they had also set down some policy objectives rather than just changing a name, because you know, as of present day, in fact in 2012, 10 years after the AU was set up, the Center for Dispute Resolution in South Africa and the Belgians, they had a colloquium in Belgium in 2012 to review 10 years of the AU. Now, I think if you have a child that is 10 years old, you don't expect the child to still be crawling or sucking his mother's breast. But when you look at 10 years review for the AU, you start to see that Africa really does have a problem. We have a problem with achieving. You know, our attitude, we are not performance related, we are not performance oriented in Africa. We tend to feel that maybe certain things are our privilege or our birthright, or because we were voted in by a certain amount of people, or we took power by the barrel of the gun, we now have a right to do as we please. So we're not really performance focused. You know, you look at countries, let me give you an example with the recent World Cup, Iceland. You know, Iceland is a country of about 337,000 people. You know, an area the size of half of Lokoja, for example, or the size of Ore. And a country like this has been able to create a team that is on the world stage playing football. And as you probably know as a football fan, you will know that none of those players are professional players. Yeah. They are made up of doctors, carpenters, plumbers, what have you. But the point is that they have an objective. They have sat down over the years. In 2016, in the European Championships, you know, they also played very well.
Well, they went far.
Yes, beat England, and I think beat Portugal, who finally won the match. So my point is this: success is a thing that is planned. You see, the AU, the African Union, needs to sit down with its heads of state, its presidents. They need to choose credible presidents, intelligent presidents, who can be effective spokesmen for the AU. Because currently, the AU does not have a voice. And by this I mean they have no leverage with the World Trade Organization. They have no leverage with the International Monetary Fund. They have no leverage with the World Bank. You know, if Africa as a whole comes together and speaks with one voice effectively, working for the interests of Africa, they would have leverage in all of these places. But if you don't have diplomatic leverage at these levels, you cannot dictate to the world what happens.
Diplomatic leverage. We'll come back to that after after this break, do we have it as a union, African Union? He talked about international politics. It's what you have, what you can take, what you can give, and of course, most importantly, leverage. In the course of this discussion, we're going to take a look at the envisioning of African Union by the late Gaddafi. Over to you, sir. And what made you think that they don't have it in quest of international politics?
Yes, you know, with international politics, it's all about leverage. It's all about what you can bring to the table. In my humble opinion, I feel that Africa has a lot that it can bring to the table. You know, the amount of foreign participation in Africa leaves me in no doubt that Africa indeed has a lot to offer. However, we have been shortchanging ourselves in the sense that we do not have a cohesive way, an organized way of projecting Africa. So the AU has this job to do, but currently they are not taking advantage of their position, and that's why I use the word leverage, giving yourself advantage. Africa has what the rest of the world wants, you know, a huge amount of resources that is needed for, you know, first world development. And you would ask yourself, well, how come a continent like this is still in the shape that it's in? And it just boils down to, as I said, the historical antecedents that Africa has been through a lot of trauma, which has created a lot of destabilization and confusion within its polity. But however, as I also said before, it is not an excuse for backwardness. You know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, you just have to make good use of the wheel. And the AU, as the body that is constituted to organize the affairs of Africa, needs to understand its power, it needs to leverage more, it needs to cohesively project a single Africa. Currently, a lot of the countries in Africa are very concerned about their own internal issues. Yeah. And for example, you look across Africa, I'm not just talking about Nigeria, across Africa, since the AU was formed in 2002, there has been a proliferation of political parties in all the countries. If we look at Nigeria, for example, I don't know, maybe we have over 100 political registered parties. You know, Ghana, Tanzania, South Africa. You know, we are very much concerned with taking power, not concerned with what to do with the power when you have it. So in Africa, we are very focused with trying to have power. You know, so if we two of us are in an organization and you want to have the power, you will go, you will form your own political party. The other person forms his own political party. In all of this, we have lost focus. We should be your country, or Africa as a whole. If you look at the first world countries, for example, America, Britain, how many political parties are registered there? They are less concerned with taking power for the sake of taking power, but rather having power in order to do good and project the image of their countries or of their continent. You know, when you hear Donald Trump talking about America, America, and countries are annoyed with him, why are you talking America? What should he be talking about? He should be talking about, you know, America. And then people often say, oh, you know, the English, the Americans, they haven't treated Nigeria well, after all, slave trade, blah, blah. Why do you think they came to Africa? They didn't come to Africa to come and help Africa. They came to take from Africa. So it is our responsibility through the AU to make sure that we take back what is ours, re-establish our position, and then we begin to influence international diplomacy and politics. This has to be the end game, where Africa, as one body, will be able to say, well, listen, whatever is happening in Korea, we have a say in that. Because other countries came and tried to resolve this issue between Donald Trump and Kim. Yeah. Right? When you are strong internationally, you start to talk about conflicts like that. You start to try and resolve people's problems when you have leverage. But when you haven't solved your own problem, where are you going to have leverage to be discussing about another country? So it is important that Africa begins to understand the strength. This divide and rule policy that has been going on in many countries in Africa, the African man also has to understand that the rest of the world has a game plan to take what it has. There's a game plan. The amount of Chinese you have in Africa today, there's a game plan. The Chinese have a game plan to make sure that China becomes stronger.
So now for what you're saying, we don't have a game plan as African Union.
We don't have a game plan.
Why would you say that?
The reason why I say this, let us look at the indices.
Okay.
And the various factors that makes a great country great or a great continent great. You look at science and technology. Every continent that is going to be strong, whether it's the American continent, the European, whatever, you must try to be number one in science and technology. Well, in the indices, if you go and look, the 10 least developed countries in technology, African countries populate that list. Let's just look at healthcare. If you look at the 10 worst healthcare delivery countries in the world, Africa is in there. You look at education, we are there. You look at agriculture. I'm not being critical, I'm just telling you the truth. So in order for you to get this leverage, there are a lot of areas that must be taken care of. We must become industrialists. We must go into industrialization. We cannot be just consumer countries.
So what is that preventing us from being all these things you've mentioned? Talk about education, talk about technology, talk about agriculture, yes, economy, you just name it. You're just there coming out first from behind and saying, what's this, what's that? How can African Union pick Africa as a continent to the like for example, the EU?
First thing that the AU, I think, can do should be a body that is influential in determining and creating a template for politics in the countries in Africa. Currently, all the countries conduct their politics the way they seem fit. And when you do that, you are only going to be getting bad leadership. And please, whoever is watching should understand, I'm not just talking about today's Nigeria or today's Africa. We have been having bad leadership since the 60s, all across Africa. You know, different countries, however they got independence, late 50s. So I'm not talking about today. Africa has been having bad leadership. And the first world countries have encouraged this bad leadership because it suited them. The more divided Africa is, the easier it is for them to have access to our resources. So the AU has to create a template across Africa that ensures that we have effective leadership, that we have leaders that are highly educated, highly exposed. It's not about having money. You know, I was listening to the new Ghanaian president talk the other day, and I said to myself, that is how an African president should be. This is a man who is bold. This is a man who is not afraid to put Ghana first, who is not afraid to project Africa. If you listen to his speeches, he's telling the first world where they have gone wrong, where they have shortchanged Africa, and that he intends to reverse the injustices done to Africa and to make sure that Africa is number one. He has said that to them. My intention is to come here and make sure that we are on the world stage because he has leverage. And he sees that Africa has incredible leverage. Now, if every president, every head of state in Africa is speaking with this like mind and that they can have a think tank, a cross-fertilization across think tanks. Right? You don't just have a think tank. Every country, I'm sure, has its own think tank. If they don't have, they have a problem. There should not be a cross-fertilization across these think tanks of the presidents talking to themselves with good intention, not godly intention, good intention for the interest of their various countries. By the time they do this, you are going to have a big bang approach. Suddenly, everybody is going to key into this template. And I tell you, my brother, it's very difficult when there's unity for anybody to penetrate into your country or into your continent. So my first advice would be to the AU to call the African leaders to create a template for effective governance. That is the first thing. And then we begin to look at different indices which developed nations ought to have. I was just talking about industrialization just now. We cannot, as Africa, we cannot be consumers. Because if you are consuming, there's capital outflow. You must create industry to have capital inflow. Then you become exporters of your product to increase your GDP. Now, if you are not able to do this, inflation across Africa will always be uncontrolled. My second suggestion is for the AU to create a system whereby communication, transportation, movement of resources across Africa has less boundaries. We must create opportunity for cross-fertilization of academics, exchange of technology, ways of, agriculture, all these marriages across Africa. We should really become one in what we do and how we do it.
All right. If you just join us, this is Africa Discourse. We're taking a look at African Union, socio-economic and political stability in Africa. What are those factors militating against them from doing their job? That is what we're taking a look at today. Mind you, you can follow us on our Twitter handle at ITV Radio NG, or better still on my own personal Twitter handle at Wilson or Marshall Wilson. Yeah, just at Marshall Wilson. And you can take a look at this program on our Go TV bouquet, channel 107, Star Times, channel 130. It's all about Africa today. Why is the African Union not ticking when you compare them to likes of the EU, European Union? After all, African Union seems to be older than European Union, but they are doing wonderfully well. But what about Africa? What are these factors? How can it be surmounted to make Africa that bright light globally? Anyway, Nepal is saying that the reason why we are having this is because of leadership in the union. Everyone seems to care about their own country. Mind you, Nigeria once upon a time stood up to become number one in the union, but somewhere along the line, it's like the powers of Nigeria, so to speak, in that union has been withered. What's your take on this?
I'm trying very hard to keep this discussion continental rather than talking about Nigeria. I'm normally very passionate about Nigeria, and I try to bring Nigeria to every conversation. But what is interesting when you are talking about Africa is that a lot of the problems that we have in Nigeria appears to also be replicated in other countries in Africa. However, as I've said, this is not an excuse. It should be a reason why we should be different. You look at a country like Rwanda. Rwanda a few years ago was at ground zero.
Yeah.
It was a country that, in fact, when I was reading and seeing a lot of images from Rwanda, I always believed that place was going to be a barren land for the next century. But I've seen recent pictures of Rwanda, and I'm amazed at the level of infrastructural rejuvenation that I have seen in that country. And my question is this: we no longer need to go abroad to see development. So the question is this: if it is happening in Africa, why can't it happen in Nigeria? You see, this is my question. So, because you mentioned Nigeria, so let me just ask. We don't need to go abroad to see templates of development. There are many countries. I was in Ethiopia a few weeks ago, and as I landed at the airport, I began to see aircrafts with the Ethiopian logo.
Yeah, Ethiopian airline.
And yes, Ethiopia, and I was sad. I was saddened. I won't lie to you. It was a major depressor for me, to see this long line of aircrafts. And I asked myself, where is Nigeria Airways? You see, Africa needs to have, these are the indices I was talking about just now. You cannot say you are a sovereign nation and you do not have for example, what makes a sovereign nation? That your territory is defined. You have a passport. You have an airline. You must have an international image. And if you are deficient in those things, then you are not really a nation. You just have an address. You don't have a house. You see? So it is important that the AU creates a template. And in that template, it will say, listen, if you are going to be a serious nation, take care of education. And these are the indices that we need in education. You must have, different standards. Yeah. Your curriculum must be this. It's a lot of work. This is the structure you are going to go through. Your tertiary institutions, these are our expectations of your tertiary institutions. Skill acquisition must be part of your education. You know, you must have doctors who know how to fix cars. You know, you must have architects who know a bit about, law. You know, we must have a template, because what makes the foreign countries that we are raving about today, what makes them different? My brother, there's nothing really different between the black man and the white man in terms of capacity and capability. And the reason why I say this is because I like to always justify my opinions. If you go to international organizations abroad, you go to hospitals abroad, you go to the National Aeronautic and Space Center in America, you will see a lot of Africans. You will see a lot of Nigerians. So the issue is not that we are not capable. We do not have a structure that empowers us to excel. We don't have that. So it is important that, when talking broadly about Africa, that a template is created that allows for this growth. This template we have them abroad. There are certain indices. So whether you go to Australia, whether you go to America, whether you go to Paris, whatever, there is a certain minimum standard that you will see in these countries. You would have trains. You would have buses. You would have effective and safe roads. You would have bridges. You would have high-speed rail. These are the things that must be there. Your educational institutions, up to 16 years old, you must go to school. There will be free education on the state. If you are a citizen of a state and you are sick, an ambulance will come and get you from the house if you cannot go to the hospital. You will be treated. If you need surgery, you will get surgery, and you will not pay unless you wish to go private. These are the indices of an organized and structured, effective, progressive environment. It is important that the AU should sit down. We are not inventing the wheel. The structure is already in these countries. Take a sample. Sit down. It will take time to do what I'm talking about, but you must begin the journey of 1,000 miles.
With just a step. All right. Now, people like saying the reason why we're having this problem is that we don't have a single currency. You go to Namibia, they have their own currency. In Nigeria, they have their own currency. In South Africa, they have the South African dollars. It's like, scattered. And Gaddafi had this notion there while he was alive to bring Africa together to operate under a single currency. And that didn't go down too well with our external bodies, talking about our bigger brothers, in quote.
Yeah. You see, this is what I'm saying. If you have a situation where you are not together, you are not organized, the enemy will always infiltrate your home. Africa is really exposed. We are exposed to foreign interference. We are unable to close our borders. We are unable to close our doors and bring our brothers into the room for close discussions. The foreign countries, they know this. So they are always there putting wedges. We should be smart to understand that we need to be talking as one body. For example, you look at the UN, the AU, for example. We don't have, I said it just now, we don't have effective spokesmen. We don't have effective spokesmen. A lot of our African countries are jostling for permanent positions in the UN. These positions are not available for any African. So rather than sit down and say, listen, rather than us backstabbing each other as to who will get an unavailable permanent position in the UN, let us be working on what is Africa's interest. If we are at a UN meeting or we are at whatever foreign meeting we are, let us decide before we go to that meeting what is good for Africa. And that is the line we are going to toe. Sadly, you will see us at conferences and at organizations. We will be talking across borders, cross purposes, disagreeing. And of course, here is Africa, not talking about a common interest. We are arguing about who should get this and who
UN
should
position,
yes.
UN seats.
So how are you ever going to have international leverage? You cannot have it because you have not put your house in order. You know what I'm saying? It's very difficult. Let me give you an example, even with the AU, for example. As of 2012, I was looking at a statistic. The European Economic Community had 33,000 staff.
33,000 staff.
33,000 staff doing their job, making sure that all the various countries that are in the European community are being taken care of, looking at things like culture, environment, tourism, environmental pollution, climate change, all these issues. They have 33,000 staff. That is Europe. Now look at Africa. That is how many times the size of Europe. We have 669 staff. You tell me how 669 staff are going to be able to deal with the affairs of a country.
Continent.
Of a continent like Africa. And then European Economic Community, as small as Europe is compared to Africa, they have 33,000 staff to deal with the affairs of Europe. You can see that. This is why at times I say that, you know, people, I don't know, maybe we are not serious about success. Success is not, it's not by chance, it's not luck. It's not like lottery. You don't just win it. Success is a soup that is deliberately cooked slowly to get the true flavor. There must be a plan. It is not just waking up and you start to run. You will get a cramp. So the truth is this, that the AU needs to sit down, and I said before, success, it takes planning. Before you even start to deploy 1 unit of energy, you must spend uncountable units of energy in the planning. So it's like a sportsman. The day you do your race or fight your fight, that is your easy day. It is the training that is difficult. Okay, so the AU needs to understand that these countries that we emulate today didn't just get to where they are just by chance. They also had their crises. You look at England, for example, they had the bubonic plague. They had a lot of crises over time. Japan was hit with atomic bombs. These countries have had their own crises. In Africa, we have not really had major crises. Our crisis is internal, fighting who will have power, who will take power today, who will come tomorrow, power sharing. Okay, we can't share, let us just fight. Oh, you are Christian, I'm Muslim, I will kill you, I will kill you. The other one says, hey, you are Hutu, oh, I'm Tutsi, I will kill you, I will kill you. Hey, you are from the north, I'm from the south, I will kill you, oh, I will kill you. That is what consumes Africa. It's not about saying, my Muslim brother, my Christian brother, you know what? Two of us, this sun is too much. How do we reduce the effect of climate change? So that, you know, we can be farming seasonally, that we no longer have the August break, that in June, July, the rains are not coming normally. What is going on with the environment? Climate change is the biggest, or should be the biggest issue today, even bigger than HIV/AIDS. Is there anybody in Africa that is talking about climate change? No. But we are talking about oil price. We are talking about this. We are talking about how many cars. We are talking about private jets. So, you see, Africa needs to be focused. There are certain things that we must look at. You know, we must look at these issues that are broad-based international issues.
So from what you're saying right now is misplacement of priority.
Gross misplacement. Gross misplacement. And terrible misalignment. You know, when your car doesn't have alignment, how does it behave? It's like this. So we must align. Africa must be properly aligned. They must be focused, they must be structured, and we need to identify a process whereby who gets power should be the right person, putting round pegs in round holes. A lot of our problem comes with bad leadership. We know this. I'm not talking what we don't know. So we need to refine, AU needs to refine the process by which leaders get to their positions as far as the presidents are concerned. And it can be done.
How can it be done? Because right now it seems like everybody wants to do their own thing, their own way. This my country, don't interfere. What about you? Fix your own business. Well, so on and so forth.
This is the point of having an organization, my brother. In Benin, for example, you have the Vulcanizers Association, do you not? Yeah. Tomato Sellers Organization, do you not? What is the point of this? Is to tell every tomato seller, hey, listen, this is how you are going to sell your tomatoes. Even if you are your guy in one village, when you come to the association, and this association will determine what happens. Tell me, if the tomato seller can do this, Why can African Union not do it?
So the question is right at you. Why can't they do it?
Okay, let me tell you why they cannot do it. Selfishness, greed, self-centeredness. This is the bane of the African person. We want to grab power. We want to remain in power. We want to dictate who is in power tomorrow. It is only in Africa you see ex-presidents who are still trying to tell you who will be your next president. Do you see Obama telling them in America who is going to be the next president? Do you see Cameron telling the British people who is going to be the next president? You see, once you disengage from power, they disengage. You don't have to be, godfather for life. And these are the issues why the AU is where it is at. Because if you bring a president today who goes to that conference, that president did not bring himself. That president has people who are remotely controlling him. Just like in a smaller scale here, we have governors in this country, for example. Do you think any governor in Nigeria today is governor of himself? He's not even governor of the people. He's governor of just a few people who put him there. So it is the same thing with our presidents. Our presidents don't get to where they are by favor, by performance. It's by favor, it is by arrangement, it's by several agreements, several marriages, and sleeping in many beds. And then before the election comes, you will see, brother, think about this and notice, every president in Nigeria, before even during that election period, they must travel abroad to go and see. They go to Chatham House, they go to America, go to Germany. What are those trips about? To tell those foreign heads of states, I'm going to be a good boy, sir. I know you have interest in my country, and I will make sure I protect your interest. Just let me carry on with what I'm doing. And they will tell you, good boy. Good talk. So you carry on. So you will see that in various African countries, our human rights record is very bad. Our disdain for court orders, the way we ignore court orders, human rights violations, extrajudicial killings. All these things happen across Africa. How come nobody makes any noise? All these foreign bodies, why do they not make any noise? Because there's an arrangement already with the various heads of state. Make sure you don't mess with my interests. So when they go to the AU, and to answer your question, why I think it is difficult for the AU to do any of this, is because they are talking to presidents. They think they are talking to the president of Uganda. They are not. They are talking to some people who are actually sitting in Uganda and waiting for him to come and report what they did. And this is why I said earlier, it is important for the AU, because that's his job, to create templates for how people become presidents and heads of state. Once you are able to get that, you limit the amount of money people use for elections. As you know, in the first world countries, there's a certain amount of money that you use for elections. Even donations for your election campaign, they are monitored. What is this for? It is to make sure that there's sanity in the system, to make sure there's order and structure, to create a level playing field so that money bags don't hijack power. So the AU needs to sit down. I've said this about four times now. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is already there. Just put it to your car. Your car will be moving. All you have to watch out now is inflation. How much air do you put in the tire? Is it bald? Is it aligned? Is it, chopping away at one side? That is what we need to do. So the AU, as the body constituted legally to look at the affairs of Africa as a whole, has the right and the duty to actually create a model by which all African countries will operate in choosing their top leaders. Once we start to get the right leaders who are patriotic, with the right attitude, with the right antecedents, you will begin to see a positive change in the entire climate of Africa, because it is the individual that makes the collective. Africa is made up of countries. By the time each country is ruled by an effective and progressive leader, you will have a top-down improvement. Because if my guy at the top is behaving well, I will behave well. But if, I go to office in the morning and my boss doesn't come till 10 o'clock, I don't see why I should be in the office until 9:30 or even 9:45. So it is important that we begin to show good example. We all see on social media, I think it was the prime minister for, was it Norway? I don't know. He dropped his coffee, and he took the mop.
Yeah.
So and started cleaning. That is the president of a country. In an African country, that president will not even drop his coffee because somebody else is holding the coffee for him. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, no African leader would have dropped that coffee because the African leader will not be holding his own coffee by himself. There will be 7 people to hold the cup of coffee. One person to put sugar, one person to drop the tea bag, another person to pour hot water. This is how we operate. So we will have 7 people involved to make 1 cup of tea. You will pay 7 salaries. So we need to have a change in attitude to Africa. The AU, because we are talking about AU, not really Nigeria, so I'm trying to keep my comments really to the AU. The AU is charged with the duty of organizing the diplomatic environment of Africa. His job is to interact with heads of states. They must create a template, a useful template that we can deploy across board.
Okay, all right. Wow, it's like a lecture today. You've heard them giving out points, very strong points on what is really happening in the Union. When I talk about, not about the U.S., but about the African Union, social, economic, and political stability. I'm really experiencing it in Africa. Take a look at the countries in Africa. Take a look at political turmoil that is happening in some of these countries. The civil unrest, insurgents here and there in Africa, and still we have our union. To call it a rapid discussion, should the AU be disbanded? There are people like, so fed up about it, saying it's like a toothless bulldog. It barks. People are saying, like, it's not even barking anymore, it's just there. I said, AU, they are just there. What should really be done? Briefly, because our time is up.
Yes, no, you cannot say let's disband the AU. Just because a hospital is bad, it has bad drugs, bad doctors, you don't shut down the hospital. What you do, you keep the building, keep the structure, keep the infrastructure, work on the personnel, work on your drug suppliers, work on training your staff, work on continuous professional development for the medical staff. And very soon, you will have a functional and effective hospital. It is not to get rid of the hospital. If you don't like your face, you don't start to cut your nose off because, you look for how to improve it.
Yeah.
So today you see some of our young ladies now, they do all kinds of makeup where you don't even recognize your sister when she's in makeup. So you improve yourself. Okay, so we don't get rid of the AU.
Yeah.
The AU should be encouraged to understand why it was set up. There's a remit given to the AU. When they look at that document, they will understand what they are supposed to do and the limit of their power. You see, when a leader doesn't know the power that he should have or he has, it's very difficult for that leader to do his job well. You see, that is one of the things. There are a lot of our people, I see people in the House of Assembly, in House of Rep.
Yeah.
People are talking about constituency project, as if that's the only reason why you are there. That's not the only reason. You have to understand why you are there and why you have power.
All right, thank you so much, Barrister Louis Ojomo. I really had a nice time because of expository explanation being given on this particular topic. I really appreciate your wonderful analysis. Well, you've heard him. Let's just see if there will be a change in attitude, a change in placing priority, a change in focusing on what is needed so that Africa can really be that continent the world should be looking up to globally for answers, not to be exploited. We'll do it again next week, Monday, God willing. Bye for now.